nā moku puni o Hawaiʻi nei e ala mai.
Aloha nui kako. Welcome everyone who is joining us today for what is sure to be a stimulating conversation on Indigenous rights to revitalize Hawaiian language insights from Hawaii's grassroots movement. My name is Kuʻuwehi Hiraishi. I'm a graduate of one of the first Hawaiian language medium education institutions in Hawaii, Ke Kulaʻanawahi o Kalani o Puʻu, and I'm currently a reporter with Hawaii Public Radio. I will be your moderator today. We hope to spend the next hour or so showcasing the successes and the challenges of Indigenous language revitalization in Hawaii over the past 40 years, with a particular focus on ʻōlelo Hawaii or Hawaiian language as a utility in today's society. But before we move on, I'd just like to briefly go over a few housekeeping matters. We will have a 15-minute Q&A or question and answer session following our panel discussion. We kindly ask that you share your questions using Zoom's Q&A feature here at the bottom of your screen. If you see a question in there that someone else posed that you would too like to hear answered, go ahead and add a thumbs up next to it. And then once we get to that Q&A session, I'll go ahead and read those questions, begin with the one with the most interest. But before I introduce our lovely panelists, I'd like to sort of ground this discussion in a little bit of history. We're going to take you back to the beginning of the movement with the creation of language nests or Pūnana Leo preschools, where Hawaiian language is the medium of education.
O ka Pūnana Leo ka honua no na kamaliʻi a me nā ʻohana e hoʻoulu ai I ka mauliola Hawaiʻi ma ko kākou ʻōlelo Hawaiʻi, ka ʻōlelo o ke ʻaina. O ka pahuhopu nui e ola ka ʻōlelo Hawaiʻi. Oh, mai kaʻi.
100 years after the overthrow of the Hawaiian kingdom, the government oppression of our language, and nearly 3 generations of very few native speakers, the Pūnana Leo were started as a means to save our ʻōlelo Hawaiʻi, our Hawaiian language.
O ke kiʻina a me ke kaʻakalai hoʻi I kiʻi ia, oia hoʻi ke kiʻi ia o nā mana leo, nā kanaka makaukau ma ka ʻōlelo, a nā lākou no e hānai aku I nā pēpē, nā punua hoʻi I kēia ʻōlelo o kākou.
Aloha, o ka mehu kahaloa, ko uinoa.
These Pūnana Leo preschools build on this strong foundation of language fluency to provide a stimulating educational environment.
O ka imi na awao ma kēia papahana Pūnana Leo, kukulu ia ma luna o ke kahi kālai ike kuʻuna Hawaiʻi. A ole loa ka awale iki.
Ma la ma ke keiki I ke kalo.
Mai ka iloa.
My wife is a teacher. She teaches young elementary school students, and so she's very inquisitive, and she was a little concerned about the fact that he would be educated in a language that isn't his first natural language.
Aloha kako e ia mai kia o ka enali ke makauka ia o a ke oni lawa o nedali ia mai o e komo.
Komo mai. We came into the school, we saw the practical, hands-on kind of knowledge, the routines, the having to lead and be actively engaged in the classroom.
Makau. Ai. Oya.
Those types of things, as far as life skills, are super important for a child to learn. And you see the development of their personalities come through because they learn to step up and to lead and to be an example and to help the younger ones and listen to the older ones and really be an active participant in the educational experience.
Mai ka I ka ena a oya.
When he first started, we were obviously worried because, fish out of water. He didn't really understand what was going on, but it's amazing. These kids will just pick it up, and it's just a natural thing that happens. And, within a matter of months, he was speaking more Hawaiian than English.
While this unique approach to a quality early childhood education attracts families brand new to the Pūnana Leo experience like Kioni's, many of our parents were actually Pūnana Leo keiki themselves.
Ua pomeka'i ku'u ohana o wau no ho'i ua make ko'u mau makua e ho'una ia'u I ke ia ano kula. Ua hilina I ko'u mau makua I ko lako na au. Anui ko'u pomeka'i no kela, no ka mea ua ho'okahua kela ia'u me ko'u no hana.
Mai ka alai mai
o?
Ka io ka la.
A ole no e lua manawa. Ua make e lilo ka ʻōlelo Hawaiʻi ke kahua o ko lako a o ana. Hele mai apuni. Ai au hiki ana lia ma leila ke kahi. Hoi o ahu! Oh my kai.
A family-based learning environment, providing a quality early childhood education entirely through the Hawaiian language, ensuring that our ʻōlelo Hawaiʻi will live on in future generations. This is the Pūnana Leo. E komo mai no.
Nani, I'd just like to say a big mahalo to the ʻAha Pūnana Leo for hosting this panel in conjunction with the United Nations Permanent Forum on Indigenous Issues. The ʻAha Pūnana Leo, for those who do not know them, it's a nonprofit, family-based educational organization dedicated to the revitalization of ʻōlelo Hawaiʻi. It is the world's first accredited early education program conducted through an endangered and indigenous language by the World Indigenous Nations Higher Education Consortium. ʻAha Pūnana Leo operates 13 preschool sites throughout Hawaii and is licensed to serve more than 400 children. The focus continues to be to nurture a new generation of speakers, of Hawaiian language speakers, that would be able to describe the world through the lens of their language and culture, as well as master English and other languages. We are very honored today to have, let's start with Anakala Lale, Larry Kimura, a founding board member of the ʻAha Pūnana Leo. He has been dubbed the grandfather of Hawaiian language and is currently Associate Professor of Hawaiian Language and Hawaiian Studies at Kahakaʻula o Keʻelikolani College of Hawaiian Language at the University of Hawaii at Hilo. His vision for the rebirth of Hawaiian language through education helped build the foundation for the Hawaiian language revitalization movement that we are currently benefiting from here in Hawaii today. Aloha Anakala Lale. Give a little wave. T. Ilihia Gionson is a 2004 graduate of the Hawaiian Language Immersion program and currently serves as the Public Affairs Officer for the Hawaii Tourism Authority as Hawaii pivots towards a regenerative economic future. For over a decade, he has worked as a writer and producer of print and television journalism with local and statewide outlets in both English and Hawaiian language. He has done private sector and government public relations at the federal, state, and county levels, serving clients in energy, government, and politics and hospitality. Aloha e Ilihia.
Aloha nui kākou.
And last but not least, Kapualei Hiraishi is a 2009 graduate of the Hawaiian Language Immersion program and is currently working towards her license as a marriage and family therapist. She studied, her background includes sociology and psychology. She has held various clinical positions both for the state and nonprofit organizations where ʻōlelo Hawaiʻi remains a foundational element in her clinical work, especially when it comes to Native Hawaiian youth and ʻohana. Aloha Kapualei ula.
Aloha kaiaka kako. Good morning, everyone.
And she is also my much smarter, much cooler younger sister. All right. Mahalo everyone for joining us, and Anakala Lale Ho'omakavome Oi, I'm going to start with you. It still feels a little foreign to speak to you in English, but I will try. Anakala Lale, I'm going to have you take us back in the late 70s, early 80s. You had a really grand vision for the Hawaiian language. What was it like to recruit people to come alongside you in fulfilling that vision and that mission? Was this even a widely accepted idea?
Well, aloha kako, mahalo. Ai malihini ho'i ke kaya kamaʻilio ana me oi ma ke ia ʻōlelo aka hiki. Ai, thank you for the question. 1970s, I was already just about to be hired to be teaching at the University of Hawaii at Manoa in Oahu. So the question about I guess the awareness of our language and its endangerment, was not quite, was just beginning in 1970s. That's when we kind of label, we didn't know this, but today we hear the term Hawaiian Renaissance, or the reawakening for the concern for our language and culture. But even at that time, as I said, I had this opportunity to begin to teach. And this is where I was about the same age. I started when I was 26 years old teaching. So my students were in their 20s as well. So they were like, classmates, I guess you could say. And this is where because when I was very young, growing up in my hometown, I was aware because of my Hawaiian side of my family, my mother, my grandmothers and aunts and uncles all spoke Hawaiian. Then on my father's side, of course, they were Japanese. My grandparents Japanese side came from Hiroshima. So my father folks spoke Japanese, but of course we were all raised in English. But being aware of Hawaiian as the language from where we are in Hawaii, our homeland, I became aware of its being spoken only by older people. So I was very concerned that, even though we're not encouraged to learn either Japanese or Hawaiian, that Hawaiian should be maintained. So by the time I got to teach, I wanted to expose our students to spoken language. I think at the university, there was a tendency to use language as an academic kind of a topic. So we did a lot of reading and reading in Hawaiian and then translating that into English. But then when I started to teach, because that's how I was taught. When I first started, I was here at the Hilo campus, there was no Hawaiian. Then when I got to Manoa, there was the co-author of our Hawaiian dictionary, Dr. Sam Albert. He was one of my teachers. And also Dorothy Kahananui, she was another of my teachers at the University of Hawaii in Manoa, which actually she was my teacher in high school. That's another story. But that's the way it was taught, more or less. So when I started to teach it, I wanted to bring the spoken language. And the way I did that was through tape recordings. And eventually, of course, we got into live native speakers. But this is how I try to encourage our young people at that time, myself and my students, that we need to begin to speak the way our people are speaking it. On that, in those days, we had people who were still speaking it on a daily basis outside of the school. Well, today, this is 50 years later, those people are no longer around. So that was the benefit those few handful of students had. And, because in fact, they told me, you're bringing these tape recordings. how about you doing a radio show so that way you can talk to these people live and everybody in the community could hear Hawaiian being spoken. So this is how we started the radio show in 1972 with the support of my students. We formed the Hawaiian club called the Hui Aloha Ina Tuahine. And so these leaders of the Hawaiian club were there and you know, speaking with live Hawaiian native Hawaiian speakers. And during our vacations, we'd go out and visit the families. In fact, sometimes we would stay with them for a whole Thanksgiving vacation or whatever, spring break, and speak only in the language. So we had that kind of opportunity, and this brought the attention to the young people, a handful of them. I'm sure you know some of them: Pila, Kawanoi, Kalena, Haunani Bernardino, and other people like that who became my colleagues in saying, look, we were speaking for hours and hours and hours about the death of our language. And especially at the university, we were exposed to a person, Sergio Rapu from Rapa Nui. He was a grad student there also. We had from New Zealand, Tamati Reedy, who was earning his PhD in linguistics. We would get together and talk about our languages in Polynesia because we're part of this family, this ohana. And the situation was the same where they were. So this is how, I guess, I'm talking, giving you a long answer about trying to find the core group of people to not feel so lonely in trying to do something. And then, of course, we eventually got to get it out of what we were doing at the time at the university. And then a few high schools were beginning to teach it as a course. And then finally in 1983, January, we formed the ʻAha Pūnana Leo.
You can have a long answer on a kalalale. That was the foundation of what we know now as the movement. So mahalo ya oi no kela, no kela mo poe, everyone named in that little monologue. The products.
Yeah, if I could just mention that it just happened that we were at a university level. Mm-hmm. You know, we have to be concerned, be aware that we had our families and our communities. However, we were initiating from a level that people would consider the heads in the clouds, you know, at the university, the academic level. But I think that is important to understand and recognize that we have a connection from top to bottom of, I'd like to say, actually, it's really, for me, I think it's bottom to top.
I hear you. It is not just teaching the language at the college level or at the preschool level, but growing the entire capacity from.
So when we talk about teamwork, I think that's what my understanding, that small group of people, that our understanding was about.
Your lessons learned. And the products of that, Anakala, have born myself, Ilihia, and Kapualei Ula to be graduates of this program, to enjoy the benefits. And I want to pose this next question to Ilihia, oi ke kahiona Pukakula Moa, as one of the early graduates of the program. What kind of changes have you seen with respect to the language revitalization or the use of Hawaiian language here in Hawaii?
Really quick answer for that. You know, growing up in Hilo, which arguably at that time had the highest concentration of Hawaiian speakers per capita in Hawaii, you know, due to the university and other efforts going on. You know, growing up, if I heard Hawaiian being spoken in the next aisle at the grocery store, guarantee I knew who it was growing up. right? Whether it was a parent scolding a child or you know, adults speaking to each other. Today, the language has grown to such an extent that I can no longer make that guarantee. And it's really nice to hear ʻōlelo Hawaiʻi out in our community. And you know, it's not folks I know. Now that I have, you know, my daughter, she's 3.5 and a student here at Pūnana Leo Kona, she'll run into kids and they'll just start rapping in ʻōlelo Hawaiʻi on the playground. And it's the coolest thing. And so to me, that's the biggest kind of outcome that has changed in the, see, I'm 36 now. So, you know, in the nearly 30 years I've been part of the Papahan'a, just seeing that change has been really big for me. Mahalo.
Nani mahalo, Ilihia. And Kapualei Ula, you're a more recent graduate. You've still had some time to get into the workforce and realize the use of ʻōlelo Hawaiʻi in your industry. How do you think your Hawaiian immersion education influenced your career path and your educational choices?
Mahalo nui for that question, Kuʻuwehi. So I think the biggest thing for me is really that reestablishment of that Hawaiian identity through Hawaiian language education, if that makes some sense. You know, in the world of psychology, understanding your identity is a big part of success. I mean, mentally, you know, hitting that moment of success in your life. And when I look at the reality of the Hawaiian language programs, the experience that you get to exclusively using the Hawaiian language throughout the day and consistently just being immersed in such a rich community of culture, that's so powerful. And that was so powerful enough to reconnect people to their sense of identity. And when I think about Hawaiian immersion education, creating that stronger sense of self, it's grounding. You know, it grounded me in a way that I had such a larger purpose and kuleana responsibility, yeah, to not just myself, but to my family and to my community as that Hawaiian language speaker. And with that strong sense of Hawaiian identity and fluency in the language, I was definitely certain that my career path would lead me or involve me in some way on some type of healing, in that healing process. So I knew when I figured out my identity as a young Native Hawaiian going in the Hawaiian immersion program, I knew my language was vital and significant in what I was going to do in the future. I didn't know how that was going to look like. I didn't think I could do this, but here we are. And yeah, that's kind of my answer. Mahalo.
Mahalo. I'll go with a quick fun one, so nothing too deep, but I pose this to all three of you. What has been the most surprising place or setting where you've met another Hawaiian language speaker or you've heard Hawaiian language spoken? Just a brief, and I'll take an answer from every one of you. But I can maybe even start. Oh, yes, please.
Yeah. Well, we just got through, right, this past weekend with the return of our Merry Monarch Hula Festival here in Hilo. And so I was so fortunate that I could attend for the last evening of the competition on Saturday evening. And I was sitting with some of our friends we were conducting ourselves in Hawaiian, of course, and in the front of us was a couple. I believe her husband is Haole, not from Hawaii, but she is from Hawaii. Anyway, she turned around and she started to speak to us in Hawaiian, and she would be in her 40s, and I knew she had heard Hawaiian, but I could tell, of course, that she was learning Hawaiian. She was beginning to learn it. But that's the kind of, how do I say, great, unexpected, somebody just turning around and beginning to try and speak Hawaiian to us, even though she knew she was not fluent. And she didn't stop, she continued, and that was wonderful. And so I said, okay, and you know how it is when you start talking about, oh, where are you from and who's, so then finally I said, I think I have a recording of one of your kupuna, because, we had our radio show, right? And so I said, so she did know about our online repository of Kani Aina. And I said, give me your email. I'll get you the right, the right program, and you can check it out, because this was done. This is done in the early 70s, right? So that's almost 40 something years ago. So like those are kinds of experiences that I find very rewarding. Of course, so many, like you just mentioned, like going shopping or wherever it is, but it's becoming a much more comfortable. Of course, at the Mary Monarch, I mean, that's where you expect to hear more speakers.
Right, right. I know, Ilihia, you mentioned this earlier. Unlikeliest place for seeing or hearing ʻōlelo Hawaiʻi?
Yeah, actually, my most unlikely one was pretty recently, and this ʻōlelo includes you, Anakala. So, in my capacity as public affairs officer at the Hawaii Tourism Authority, I oftentimes have to seek legal counsel from our Deputy Attorney General, whether it's a records request or a media request or various sensitive topics like that. And I found out that our assigned legal counsel in ʻōlelo Hawaiʻi, a man by the name of Greg Kinkley, Anakala Lale, he knew you back in the linguistics program at Manoa. He was studying Samoan or something like that. So that was certainly a surprise to learn that about our legal counsel.
Wow, I had no idea. Kapualei Ula, rarest sort of a spot to hear ʻōlelo Hawaiʻi for you? Any?
I think, I was going to kind of piggyback on what Ilihia said, because the biggest thing for me when I started noticing more people speaking was the grocery stores, for sure. And not just like, it was people, the unfamiliarity of, okay, I'm in Hilo, I know about the 100 people that can speak in this little area. Like, I don't know who that is. So it was kind of caught off guard that was happening in the stores. But what I've noticed more so is the non-speakers. There's labels of Hawaiian words and Hawaiian language all over these stores. The non-speakers are finding interest in that. So I think that's also a bridge that we're finding. It's not just the people that are speaking Hawaiian language that we're finding in unique ways. It's the ones that are interested, that are not quite there yet, but that are finding the exposure and accessibility of our ʻōlelo all around, that's motivating them to seek interest and learn more. And I think that's what a lot of our parents did. Then when they got started in this Papahanna, they were so interested and eager and had so much hope and trust. And I think that's happening with the rest of the world now. So right on world. Okay,
yeah, if I could add with the rest of the world, because we have everything online, we have lots of ʻōlelo online now. So, for example, about 3 weeks ago, we had a group from the Dartmouth College from New Hampshire here, and among them was one speaker, quite getting to be fluent, and he said he never took Hawaiian in any official, as a student, but just online, hearing Hawaiian being spoken, he's taught himself. Of course, it helps that he is a linguistics major, and also his mother is from Hawaii, but he was brought up in the mainland, in South Carolina, and he taught himself, and now he's going to become fluent. He is becoming fluent. In fact, he was fluent, so that I said, can I interview you? Because I'd like to have this on record. So we did an interview. So more and more people are learning just because we are providing, Hawaiian online.
More accessible. I know it's a constant challenge for us to. Oh yeah, go ahead.
To add on to that too, another big platform that has driven a lot of people to at least get a passing familiarity with ʻōlelo is a partnership with the language learning app Duolingo. That started maybe 3-4 years ago. There's a Pūnana Leo parent who's a MIT alum, and so through that network, he got hooked up with the Duolingo guys. And so Hawaiian is one of the quickest growing languages on the app. And so as I kind of, travel back and forth quite a bit for work, You can hear that distinctive Duolingo ding in the airport, people trying to brush up as they get here. The last thing I wanted to add, though, to that question is there's sort of a kuleana as an immersion graduate to take the language to those unexpected places, right? So we're surprised and delighted when we hear it, but there's certainly a responsibility to go take it and push it into those places. You know, you had if any of you were on a little bit early before we started, you could hear a song in the background from a classmate of Kuʻuwehi's, Kalani Pe'a, 3-time Grammy winner, and he makes it a point to deliver his acceptance speeches on the Grammy stage in ʻōlelo, Hawaii. Right? That's an unexpected place, but that's sort of the privilege and responsibility of the immersion graduate is to take it into that place.
Nani Ilihia, I completely kako'o, and yes, a big shout out to my classmate, Kalani Pe'a, 3rd-time Grammy winner, adding a 3rd this year.
Although I'd say the liner notes on the 3rd album, probably the best.
Yes, written by our own Ilihia. Ilihia, I want to kind of dig into your profession a little bit. You know, a lot of what you do is related to the visitor industry and ensuring a voice for Native Hawaiians there. And this question is something we spoke about before. Hawaiian language, like many others, things related to the Native culture in Hawaii, has been used to feed economic drivers such as tourism, the tourism industry, and can sometimes be seen as exploitative in nature. Do you think there's a space for Hawaiian language to be used in such ways?
Yeah, I had to take a swig of coffee before that one. It's a big question. So first things first, just setting the stage. I think a lot of times the difference between usage and exploitation is who's doing it, right? Who's driving, who's in leadership, and who benefits from things. I'm very honored to be a part of the Hawaii Tourism Authority at this time. First Native Hawaiian CEO is leading in John DeFries. We have a Native Hawaiian board chair. He's not the first, one of many, and we're happy to have that kind of diversity on the board as well. And you know, a significant chunk of the team are Hawaiian language speakers, including our chief brand officer. So kind of on that, you know, of the executive leadership team, 2 out of 3. So, you know, our ʻōlelo Hawaii, our language, the knowledge associated with it guided us through our traditional economy, right? When we think about farming, fishing, bartering, these traditional economic activities. These gifts, the gifts of this knowledge, you know, these are gifts that we get from our elders. I'm not calling you old, anakala'alale, but certainly these gifts we get through our elders through vessels like Kaleo Hawaii and our newspaper, treasure troves, all that stuff. Those gifts are helping to guide us back to a circular, regenerative economy that can give back more than it takes, right? And there are efforts like the Aina Aloha Economics Futures, the declaration and the follow-on activities that lay out how we can do that, how we can take that transition to a circular, regenerative economy based on and grounded in our values, articulating how to embrace them, not to exploit them. Of the 14 co-authors of that declaration, half of them are fluent speakers of Hawaiian, including a fellow Pūnana Leo Okona parent, including former colleagues of mine, including our chief brand officer at the Hawaii Tourism Authority. So as we have this bigger conversation about what are economic models that work on an island, that work for people, that work for communities, we do think that tourism can lead that. We think it has the size and the scale and the appetite for change to shift those things. And ʻōlelo Hawaii being the key to unlock that wisdom, to unlock that knowledge, is leading the way. So it's not an exploitation, it's a usage to make the world a better place, frankly.
Oh, nani. See, he's articulate in Hawaiian and English. Mahalo, Ilihia. Going back Anakala, I want to go to you, Anakala Lale, kind of getting your, I want to see what your report card would be for the movement after 40 years of the ʻAha Pūnana Leo. Are we where you thought, where you had envisioned we would be?
Wow, wow. You know, I'm a strict grader. If you ask my,
Oh yeah,
maybe
it's true.
my favorite color I think is red ink. But anyway, no, I have had, as it was happening, the standards. I mean, all we were worried about and concerned is that we need to have our language become more normal. And this is why we wanted to target the families, and the way we target the families, like Ilihia's baby, we said, give me your baby. Anyway, and as you saw in our video clip, that they were the warriors, these little children, and they didn't know that they were. And you see how powerful that is. And I think, thanks. Well, we mahalo our cousins in New Zealand, our Aotearoa Maori people, but actually, we never went to New Zealand till after we had started our first school, 6 years after we started our first school, because the whole philosophy of you speak to your children and they will speak back to you in your language is a very basic, although it wasn't that easy to initiate that, but it's a very common sense basic rule. And so absolutely, my grade is A++, if I have to give you a grade. I mean, it's just so many unexpected achievements, if I could put it that way, because it takes time to bring a language back. It just doesn't happen very overnight. And as you can see, I guess we've had 3 generations, maybe going 4 now. Now the original parents are grandparents because their children have had children. So it takes a while, and then, as Ilihia is saying, to be a part of our community and even become a part of the larger world because of the way our world operates today. And I think the tourist industry has great potential to bring our culture to be a part of this industry. It's not to exploit our culture. It's, I think, something that we can contribute to, in not only, of course, in the tourist industry, in all our occupations, if we have to, narrow it down to that way, because language permeates everywhere. Mahalo.
Okay. Mahalo, Anakala. And Kapualei Ula, I'll turn to you for this one. Similar to Ilihia's question in terms of using language in your profession, do you find ʻōlelo Hawaiʻi, or maybe the perspectives that come with the use of ʻōlelo Hawaiʻi, relevant in your career in dealing specifically with clients with Indigenous backgrounds?
Yeah, so easy answer to that is yes. I definitely see the benefits of that, and mostly because of when you think about Indigenous people, right? We think about Indigenous people. What does that mean? What is that? How does that separate us from what you would call not Indigenous people, right? Indigenous people, at some point in time in the psychological world, at some point in time, they went through some type of historical traumatic event, big enough to shake the culture, big enough to almost lose the language. There's traumatic events that happen in these Indigenous cultures, and they have these things documented. And what we look at is survival strategies. So yes, being a Native Hawaiian, knowing the language and having the perspective of the Hawaiian culture, when I bring that into a room of healing, right? When I'm working on therapy and working with our Native families, the connection of language and culture, that commonality is there. It's there. And I think in my career path, specifically in the psychology world, the number one step in that healing process is the ability to trust your provider, trust that therapist, right? if I can ʻōlelo, if I can speak in their native tongue, if I can come into their home with the same cultural perspectives or share and educate them if they don't already have those established, that relationship, that pilina, is the strength that it's going to take for them to heal through whatever mental health issues that they have been going through. So definitely, yes, the language has definitely been a vehicle that I've utilized as a technique in therapy to ground myself and connect with our people. So I can dig deeper into the things that are below the surface, right? The deeper issues that most times are caused from historical trauma. And yeah, I could talk about this all day, so I'm gonna cut myself off. But yeah, does that answer your question, Kuʻuwehi?
That does. Mahalo. I wanted to take the next couple of questions to look a bit into the future for all of us and kind of think of what can be done, what ʻōlelo Hawaiʻi looks like moving forward. Anakala Lale, I'll start with you. What do you think the younger generations need to have as their grand vision to really reach a thriving Hawaiian language?
Well, first of all, be as fluent as you can be, even with the challenges of not having that, available live, our native speaking population. However, there is another population, right? Because right at this minute, as we're speaking, there are 3,600 plus students speaking Hawaiian through our public school Hawaiian language immersion programs. And, that has been going on for nearly 40 years, if we're counting since the establishment of our ʻAha Pūnana Leo in 1983. So remind me of the question, please. I'm getting
it's sort of if you have any maybe mana'oa'oa'o or advice for, a crucial component that needs to be there.
The solid foundation is that when we look, it's documented. Our culture, our language is, we became illiterate like almost overnight in our own language. So we have lots of documentation, rich documentation in all occupations, in all understandings, in all levels of a typical, I guess you could say, society. Yeah, if you count by money, if you go by economics, as people do today, from the richest to the poorest, we had the whole gamut. And, not everybody is going to be rich and not everybody is going to be poor, but what we want to do, of course, is have everybody have a healthy lifestyle. And our language does that. I think our language is going to be a very foundational, means, medium for us to get there. And I think as strong as we can language, that is going to be as strong as we can be as a people. So I'm not saying that if you don't speak Hawaiian, you're not Hawaiian. I'm not saying that, but somehow I believe that, as we say from our college's mission statement, that our language binds us to who we are, and to be who we are, I think is very important here in Hawaii for us, as well as our people, ʻohana, who have left Hawaii for various reasons, and one being is not so affordable anymore. However, that's not necessarily only here in Hawaii. If they go over there in other places, it's becoming, hard to find affordable housing too. So I just think that, our example of who we have been and we are is because of our being able to conduct ourselves in our own identity. And it's a healthy, wonderful, precious, rich culture and identity. That's all I believe. So I think the more we get strong in that, it's gonna work. That's the formula.
The opportunities are endless now that we are increasing our capacity here. I want to turn to you, Kapualei Ula, to touch on, it's a rarity to have someone in your profession who speaks ʻōlelo Hawaiʻi to the level of fluency that you have. and now with a growing body of speakers to be, to take up your therapy, how do you see us increasing the capacity for ʻōlelo Hawaiʻi use in your industry and even beyond that?
That's a great question. I think if we go back to when we think of capacity, okay, so we're thinking bodies. That's what we wanted in the beginning, right? We wanted the number. Significant was the language was withering down. So even when we were Ilihia, even when, because I was kind of 5 years right after you, it was still important for us to go into education, right? After Hawaiian immersion, go into education, we be teachers. And I saw kako that, and I appreciate everybody that did do that. And when I look at that I was stuck, I think, at that time, trying to figure out, I know I want to go into therapy. I don't know if I can bring the language, or how do I do this, right? And when I finally got into the mental health field and I figured out that, oh my gosh, it's not as hard. It's the numbers that we need. It's the bodies that I would need. It's like, it takes just one person to collect these ideas, but I need, like you said, I need to grow that capacity. So what does that look like? When at my previous role in my previous job, I was a supervisor, and what I was doing at that time was creating a careers pathway for young Native Hawaiians that are Hawaiian language speakers that are interested in going into the mental health field. I was working on creating a program, and when we did surveys on how to build that capacity, it was hard to really figure out where Hawaiian immersion students were going. Everyone just had all these different paths. It's so like there was just, it wasn't, what is it called? It wasn't very clear enough to see if they were going to be interested in this profession, but I also don't think that they understood the flexibility and what we can do with the language. Because even myself, I found myself 3 years ago receiving a grant that said, yes, on July 1st, you can start speaking ʻōlelo Hawaiʻi and working with your families doing therapy. And I was like, what? That's huge. But it's really things that we don't think about. You know, I want it to be a kumu in a sense. I understand now that my role as an educator would be educating in the mental health field. So as far as building the capacity, we just need to get information on where these kids are nowadays. Where are our Hawaiian language speakers? What are their interests? You know, if we have Hawaiian language speakers that are maybe working at a job that's not as fulfilling for them, what are your interests? You know, let's bring back that identity that we worked on. And when you're in the Hawaiian language program, like, let's bring that back. And from there, we'll figure out what what you're meant for. And I think that the capacity building is really about finding out where all of our students are, or the graduates and the successes, like all of us just being here today and working together to kind of, put these programs together and just highlight the significance of our language in not just mental health, but the potential it has in so many different industries. And I think that's, the capacity. I'm still thinking about that, but I definitely think it has to do with like a pathway of some sort. And I definitely need a lot of help, kind of like how you guys created this revitalization movement. So I'm going to follow your guys' step. Mahalo.
Maikai. All right, Ilihia. So in terms of the growth, looking to the future, what areas, industry sectors do you feel like we will see the most growth in use of Hawaiian language? And what areas do you think needs more Hawaiian language?
Everywhere. Mahalo. No, I'll dive in a little bit more to that. I mean, truthfully, yes, everywhere, right? I think to Kapualei Ula's excellent point, yes, we absolutely need more teachers and everything else, right? We need the Hawaiian speaking, police officer, firefighter, grocery store clerk. A classmate of mine just left the classroom to go do drug rehabilitation, with a cultural context, right? So there's all these different things, flight attendants, lots of those. So everywhere is the answer, but 3 places in particular, I think are really well aligned, and ʻōlelo Hawaiʻi and the Hawaiian speaking community could really contribute to these 3. So one, I talked about the visitor industry a little bit. at COP26 in November, one of the outcomes was the Glasgow Declaration on Climate Action in Tourism. Over 500 signatories so far. That's an example of the indigenous wisdom of Malama Honua, or caring for our earth, being put into action in the mainstream, right? This isn't just a niche thing anymore. And a lot of that realization of the need for climate action came from indigenous communities. The other thing that sort of primes the pump for this in the visitor industry is that the market appetite is shifting to authentic experiences, to stewardship experiences. This is what the market wants, right? We're not trying to force folks to do anything they don't want to do. But that market appetite has shifted such that, Hawaii's branding efforts to the world have shifted from a campaign called Let Hawaii Happen, which prioritized the needs and the wants of the guest, to something called Hawaii Rooted. If you look at that on YouTube, you'll see a lot of familiar faces. And now we're at Malama Hawaii, where we share the stories of people caring for this place, of stewarding this place, and inviting visitors to take a part in that. Now, whether that's spending a day at a taro patch to give back, whether that's supporting local and native-owned businesses with your dollars, or just being mindful about these things and returning home with those lessons. Because, when you talk about tourism and climate, if you're gonna fly here, you're already in the hole in terms of environmental impact. How can we make it worth it so people will go home inspired to be better stewards of their home? Okay, so that's visitor industry. Another one related, conservation and sustainable development. When we look at the SDGs, when we look at Hawaii's local kind of framework to achieve those SDGs that actually predated it, the Aloha Plus Challenge, that was inspired by ahupua'a and the concepts of resource management here in Hawaii, the kinds of things unlocked by an understanding of the Hawaiian language and the various things that have happened since then. And then the last of the three, diplomacy and international relations, I think could really benefit not just from ʻōlelo Hawaii, but from indigenous languages around the world, right? Auntie Pilahi Paki once said that the world is searching for a key that Hawaii has, and that key is aloha, right? So what does that unlock? It unlocks these ways that we can treat each other better. It unlocks the ways that we can treat our homes and our communities better, and our earth, all of that stuff. Anakala Larry talked about colleagues in Rapa Nui and Aotearoa at the early stages of this language revitalization movement. It's kind of coming full circle. In 2024, Hawaii will, for the first time, host the Festival of Pacific Arts and Culture, which is, traditionally it's been a South Pacific thing. This is the first time Hawaii is hosting, though Hawaii has been in attendance for many years. It's not only a sharing of culture and arts, it is becoming more and more a diplomatic affair because of the various tensions in the Pacific region, right? Asia Pacific is the focus for so much. And so we're honored to host that. And ʻŌlelo Hawaii is going to lead a lot of what we share at FestPac. And that's going to be our contribution to diplomacy and international relations. But those are my three. Mahalo nui.
Many and very well thought out. So I wanted to actually do a quick, I know you both, Kapualei Ula and Ilihia, are young parents of toddlers. Of course, Kawai, Ilihia, your daughter is enrolled in Pūnana Leo. Kapualei Ula, your son, is about to reach the age where he can get into Pūnana Leo. I just wanted to ask you both, as graduates of the program who also are stewards of our next generation, basically, of speakers, what words of advice might you have for other Indigenous communities, parents from other Indigenous communities, worried or looking to enroll their kids in the program, but not sure how to go about it? I'll start maybe with, since Ilihia just did that nice long answer, I'll start with you, Kapualei Ula.
Okay. I think it's just having that trust, but we need to figure out a way to draw in these people. Because I remember when what your question, sorry, Kuʻuwehi, what was the question again? I don't want to get too off topic.
No, yeah, it was what words of advice might you have as a parent or as a graduate who went through the program for parents now that you are a parent, thinking about enrolling their kids. So you've got both sides of it. Yeah.
Gotcha. Okay, and it's perfect too because my child isn't yet in there, hopefully starting in July. So I think from my experience is the consistency of utilizing the language yourself with your ʻohana in the home. And I have to be honest, I mean, I went off to college, I went to California, I played soccer, I was used to my language because I had my sister, but it wasn't the consistency and the fluency of exclusively using it every day in the Hawaiian language immersion programs. It didn't have that consistency, and I was away from college. So it was remembering to come back. Ho'i kapiko, we talk about that, coming back to the foundational pieces of where you come from and what you believe and where your values come from. And that's a big part of, I think, where I struggled with is I was just so busy in my career. I didn't come back too fast back to Hawaii yet. And I grounded myself 5 years too late. So I think right now I'm trying to bring back my ʻōlelo, to be honest, bring it back more consistently in my home with my keiki that is about to be 3 years old. And more importantly, going to Pūnana Leo, right? Well, Pukakulava, I graduated, so I better be one of those makuas that are there that can understand. And this is something that Kuʻuwehi has always reminded me, because I've told her too. It's like, do I need to go back to school? Do I need to go get educated and go get my degree in Hawaiian language? Like, I feel like I'm losing it. And the more she would remind me to just keep speaking, just use it because there's sometimes where Kuʻuwehi would call me and she would not answer my questions on the phone unless I spoke to Hawaiian or responded in Hawaiian. She would not talk to me. And those little things are, I think, is important, that they can't, like, if we're trying to motivate or encourage people to put their kids, or if they're having like second thoughts of putting them in the program, is to just be open-minded, and having, and with the idea that there's all this new world of culture and language in which they might not have been introduced to, and they might not be aware of all these techniques or different traditions and customs that we use, but let's expose them to it. And through that, we can influence them and motivate them. But it has to start with an open mind and kind of a blind trust, just like Anakala Lale, all you guys folks had in our ʻōlelo, in the culture. You had such a firm, significant belief. And I think if we can continue to perpetuate that belief and continue to show our successes, like on panels like this is going to be enough to keep motivating and keep this conversation going and discussions going, to keep the significance throughout time. And I think that answers my question.
Nani, Ilihia, any words of wisdom from a graduate turned parent?
We've thought about this a lot. My partner and I, she did not grow up speaking. Her dad did. She's a graduate of the Kamehameha schools. But as we thought about school for our keiki, what it ultimately came down to was commitment. And the commitment was not just ours, but entrusting my keiki to a place that sort of aggregated families that know how to make a commitment. It's not easy doing something different. I drive past 4 or 5 English preschools on my way to Pūnana Leo Kona from my house. That would be easy, right? Going to the school with the lower tuition or the shorter drive, or the more parents that I know from around town would have been easy. But knowing that I was making a commitment to the best education that my keiki could have in the beloved language of her ancestors meant everything. And knowing that her classmates and their families made similar commitments, that's what guided us to the decision we made. And we're almost at the end of year 1 and highly recommend it. For other, Indigenous folks who may be tuned into this, we're so spoiled here in Hawaii to have access to places like Pūnana Leo because of the hard work of those who came before. I saw Anakena Maka popping up in the chat, Mahalo Nui A'oe, Anakalalale, and all of the, the folks who Anakalalale named earlier who started this. It's such a benefit. So if somebody in your Indigenous community is trying to get something started, surround them with your love, surround them with your support, just help them out, because it's critical to set that infrastructure for your kids and future generations. Mahalo.
Nani Ilihia. Anakalalale, I want to jump to you because, we, as graduates of the Papahana of the movement, we oftentimes get a lot of credit for really just being thrown into the program and with very little choice. And, I want to give a big mahalo, a show of appreciation to all the makua who may not have known Hawaiian language when they enrolled their kids in the program. But as Kapualei Ula and Ilihia touched on, they were committed and they had trust that this movement would at some point bear fruit. But how was it to convince parents? Did you need to convince parents early on that this is something that is worth throwing their kid into? Because for many of us, that was the case.
We're just lucky that the time that we started, that we had at least some parents who were, the pioneering parents, the beginning, who said, we have to try this. I mean, that's a major decision with your own children, your own child. And however, we had the parent support. If we didn't have parents who believed in what we've been talking about, we would never have started. And that was the major, element, that if we didn't have that quality in our program, we didn't have the support of our ohana, it would have been hard. And of course, that means from our program point of view, we have to put our dreams out there, right? We want to put our language out there. We want to put our culture the best way we can, even though we had very little. And thank goodness, things gelled, things came together with the support. As it started, it just had the support of the families. Yeah, and when in Hawaii, when we say families, it's just not mother and father and parents. It extended into the whole network of ohana, cousins, aunties, and even their neighbors and community. So that's essential. But main thing is that we could speak to their child in Hawaiian only for the duration of the school day at the beginning, basic stuff, and then get into developing our programs. And of course, today we're meeting with challenges of a growing growing demand for our Hawaiian, what we call Hawaiian Immersion or Hawaiian medium education. And then we need to develop more teachers, qualified teachers, and curriculum material. And, the world is upon us. So this is the challenge when we use our language in education, is that it brings the world into our language. And that is good, because that's how we want to be. We want to live in today's time as well, right? We want to live today and into tomorrow. So that was a challenge. And that's what I guess Hawaii's initiative is I have to say, to be congratulated, because it's not easy to use your language as a medium of education. But as what we're talking now, and how we can get this into all fields. And it doesn't mean that, there are all kinds of ways. Ilihia and all of you, Kapualei Ula and all, have been talking about how you can incorporate our language, our Kuana Ike, our perspective of who we are. And because it's wonderful, it's great to have this quality to be a part of our world. And I think we all know that. And so that's another great aspect of bringing our language to convey all of this in our way of being.
Kako'o Anakalalale Mahalo. I wanted to sort of pivot to the graduates one more time. In terms of the challenges of, as Anakalalale mentioned, we all remember going to protests and demonstrations at the state capitol, lobbying television networks and the Office of Hawaiian Affairs for funding. We have had to fight. This really has been a grassroots movement to ho'ola Hawaii, to revitalize our language in the way that we've chosen to. But there still are challenges. Challenges remain. Some may be familiar that there was a Hawaii Supreme Court case in which a family had wanted access to ʻōlelo Hawaii education. They're on Lanai, the Clarabelle ʻohana, mahalo for doing that, but could not, there was no capacity, essentially, is what it came down to. But how do we build capacity? There's such a growing demand for ʻōlelo Hawaii education for everyone, maybe, and not even just here in Hawaii, but beyond Hawaii. As one of my classmates here on this panel, or on this listening to this panel, Leila Ka'ula, posed that question, that there is interest and demand on with our the diaspora there on the continent. How do we, and whoever wants to answer this one first, how do we increase the capacity for seats in classrooms and access to public education of ʻōlelo Hawaii?
Well, you know,
yes,
there's some basic needs, right? You know, there's something to be said about supporting a educational program for licensing, you know, our teachers. And I believe we can beef that up a little bit more. And it, you know, always it requires some funding, you know. So having a standing budget, for example, from the state of Hawaii, which has declared Hawaiian as one of its native language, as its official language. Our native Hawaiian language is an official language. It's great to have that on black and white on a piece of paper, but you know, we have to put something behind of that. So is there some official standing budget to support the development of qualified teachers for Hawaiian medium education from the Office of Hawaiian Affairs, for example, or from the State Department of Education, for example?
Yes, if you're listening now, guys.
Just because we're doing successful education, it doesn't mean we're just part of the public school system. I think we still need some assistance, and they need assistance as well. I mean, this crisis about not having enough teachers, qualified teachers, applies to all levels of, public school education as well. Private schools are doing pretty good. I mean, you know, Kamehameha is a mahalo nui to Princess Kealiʻikolani and her connection to her great-grandfather Kamehameha. Our great king left all his property for us. My, well, let's get together. These are all kinds of strategies you're talking about, or concerns. And then, of course, we are, as I'm saying, we are building our capacity of second language fluent speakers, and you folks are products of all of that. And look, you know, this is wonderful. So we're going to have to accommodate all of this in a positive way, and it can be, and it is being done. But there's a little bit, you know, kokua that needs to be happening as we talk about it from the back door, if we can't come in through the front.
Ilihia and Kapualei Ula, did you guys want to add anything to that? And the question was sort of how do we build more capacity in the classrooms and make, you know, access to education. Yeah.
You know, a lot of it, unfortunately, does come down to resourcing, right? When we think about the kinds of schools that our keiki want to attend and the kind of schools that our teachers want to teach at, a lot of our public school facilities in Hawaii maybe don't hit that bar. And not speaking about our preschool system, I'm transitioning now to the, you know, the public education system where our keiki head after Pūnana Leo. I think at the end of the day, it requires commitment, right? It requires commitment by our lawmakers to prioritize that which is important, which should be education, and specifically education in both of Hawaii's official languages. One thing that's exciting in that regard that I see happening is there are a lot of ʻōiwi and lots of younger ʻōiwi running for political office. It's really inspiring. The current, you know, majority leader in the Hawaii State Senate is my senator, Drew Kanuha, Kekio Ka'aino Kona. He's kind of between my age and Kuʻuwehi's age, #2 in the Hawaii State Senate. And you see, you know, senators and House reps and county council members, all kind. Here at the Hawaii County Council, we have one member who's fluent, and he's introduced a few bills and resolutions, things like that, in ʻōlelo Hawaii. And so a lot of this will take time. There's no easy fix, but I think electing folks with the correct value set and perspectives will help this in the long run. Again, no quick fix, but it's trending in the right direction, I would say.
Perfect response from a public relations person. Trending in the right direction. Kapualei, Ola, did you want to add anything to what was
that? Some of the things that Anakalala just touched up on is, because it's similar as how I kind of seen how my profession, and when we're thinking about building capacity, because I know I was talking about this earlier, in the Hawaiian language, specifically, when I think about the capacity of the classrooms, I feel that not only, I mean, the resources are definitely huge. I know Ilihia was saying that. The funding, I hate to have to say this, but the funding has always been, I think, a huge problem in a lot of different industries. And I want to get back just to my realm of like the mental health world. I was so close of just getting one more Hawaiian language speaking therapist, my classmate, Malia Donaghy, to be a part of my program. The biggest issue we had was funding. I could not get that extra kokua. I couldn't get that extra resources because of the lack of funding in my program. So I see that as a continuous challenge. And I think the feedback I got from funders that didn't give us the money was basically, we need more. We need more proof. We need more proof. And it's just like, oh my gosh, look at all of this success on this panel right now. How much more proof? How much more documents? How much more do we have to show? And I think we are at that place where Anakalale said, you know, we're still kind of struggling. We still need that kokua. And it's okay to be honest about that. I think that's the resiliency that we have with our Kwana Ike and the utilization of our languages. We have enough and we know where we're going. We might not understand all the different areas of how we're going to meet that capacity, but we all have that same Kwana Ike, the same drive and the same goal of utilizing the Hawaiian language in all areas of life. And I think if we start from there, the capacity will build. It's hard to believe in that, but how did we start off, right, Anakalalale? Did you have any naysayers, right? Was everybody just like, yeah, Hawaiian language, right? So that's my mana'o. But
no, one other thing, if I could add quick, and I know we're running short on time, but I think the other end of the funnel is the demand for Hawaiian speakers, right? When we induce demand for Hawaiian speakers in various industries and in various places, there's more awareness, there's more, value perceived in receiving a Hawaiian language education. And once you do that, then you grow the demand. And when you grow the demand, it's hard to deny the demand for Hawaiian education. I remember I didn't start in the Papahana in the program until 3rd grade because there was a waiting list. That's how much demand there was in the beginning, right? So now there's a diversity of culturally appropriate and language infused education options. Pūnana Leo and the Hawaiian Immersion system being sort of the gold standard on the language side of the house. But when we look at places like, my start in the hospitality industry was with Walt Disney Imagineering, developing content for Aulani, the resort on Oahu. And in their as they were hiring, like every position description said, you know, ʻōlelo Hawaii preferred. There are places in Aulani that require Hawaiian language fluency, right, in the ʻōlelo room. So when you see private industry starting to generate and induce some of that demand for Hawaiian speakers, now you get young folks looking like, hey, wow, it's going to help me out later on, beyond all the other stuff we've already talked about, right? Economics, for better or worse, drives a lot of our decision making. And so I think to the extent the private sector can help kokua with hiring graduates, supporting graduates, looking for graduates, looking for speakers, that's a big help too. I mean, you hear a lot of times from folks, you know, probably a little older than us, oh, I took Japanese in high school because the tour companies, they always hiring Japanese speakers, right? So it helped folks make those choices. How do we do that for ʻōlelo Hawaii?
Oh,
one quick plug, kuhikuhi.com is a directory of Hawaiian-owned businesses put together by Hawaii's Native Hawaiian Chambers of Commerce. One of the things you can search is for businesses and professionals who speak Hawaiian. So you can choose to support those folks if you need a handyman or a physical therapist or plumber or whatever the case may be.
I love it. We'll include that in our chat if we can, Alika. And I'm going to just move very quickly into, there are a couple of questions, it looks like, our Q&A section of this session. If anyone does have any now or questions, feel free to include them in the using the Q&A feature down below. I'll start with a question from Mona Kea, and I'll pose it to all three of you, and you let me know who wants to go first. Can we require the State of Hawaii Board of Education to provide Hawaiian medium education equal to that of English as mandated by the law by providing emergency pay to native speakers so that all public schools have access, and all keiki, Hawaiian and non-Hawaiian, so that we can make Hawaiian the main language of Hawaii? Any takers?
I think we did something like that. Maybe last year or the year before, approving a pay differential for kind of hard to fill teacher spots, which included special education teachers, certain rural schools, as well as Hawaiian immersion schools. But perhaps somebody else knows a little bit more about the current status of that.
Yeah, I'm not sure about any extra pay for our Hawaiian immersion, Hawaiian medium teachers. However,
go ahead, Anakala.
No, that's all. Just that thank you for that question from, is it Mona or someone? The enthusiasm, the interest for supporting this concern, which is in order to have teachers, and there are not too many native speakers out there anymore. And great, because we worked with native speakers from the beginning, non-licensed. We had to, because we didn't have a program to license. But at the same time, as I said, this connection to improve our program, educational program, our content and methods and teaching and curriculum were all very crucial and still are crucial in bringing up the quality of our educational program. And the philosophy of our Hawaiian education program is not just taking an English book and translating it into Hawaiian, and that makes it Hawaiian. No, we have our own perspective on Hawaii and incorporating our Hawaiian culture into the content of our education. But definitely, I think, much more can be done to promote recruiting more teachers to be a part of our program. Then we can expand the program to larger community. So I guess that's about our challenge right now. Yeah, to do that. And for all practical purposes, our native speaking population from traditional times has gone down. And just because you speak Hawaiian doesn't necessarily make you a qualified teacher to be in a educational program. But we can still utilize, of course, if there are any. I know the population from Ni'ihau has been facing challenges because they need to get qualified to become a teacher. And that is good. That is a good challenge. Why not? Not just because you can speak a language. I speak English, so I can become a teacher. No, you have to be qualified as well.
Kapualei, Ula, did you want to add anything to that answer?
I think Ana Kalolale covered that pretty well.
I will just, as a side note, add that the pay increase that Ilihia was referring to was about $8,000 annual incentivized pay for qualified Hawaiian medium education teachers. SPED teachers at $10,000. I know initially, I don't know the current status as of this year, if anything changed because of the pandemic, but I do know it initially did, the DOE did see a boost in applicants wanting to either teach at those schools or move to areas where that there was demand for that sort of teaching and education. So I'll add that to that one. And then I've got another question here. With so many, and yes, going back to the idea of Pūnana Leo on the continent, with so many Native Hawaiians in the diaspora on the continent and even elsewhere in other countries, do you have any thoughts on building Pūnana Leo in these communities?
I know we have discussed that at our some of our meetings, and it's possible to begin some spot over there, and whether it be California, Washington State, or wherever, and and with this our technology today, we can kind of zoom in once in a while to assist. But I think we still need live, contact, especially if we're going to be starting at that age group, 3-year-old, early childhood education. So that's something. I know some of our staff, Pūnana Leo staff, are listening in today. So we'll bring that up again, I'm sure.
What about you graduates? Yes.
This census in 2020 was the first time that, I don't know if it did go over the tipping point, but darn near close to having more Hawaiians outside of Hawaii. So when we think about this idea of bringing our ʻōlelo to those Kanaka who are no longer here, I think there's definitely some merit to that. But I wonder if, I remember growing up in the program, we hosted a lot of Indigenous groups to kind of see what we were doing and perhaps, learn from or be inspired to start their own language revitalization movement. So I wonder if something like that could be a part of a partnership with the Native peoples in those places, for some capacity building, like, okay, we go make our preschool here, and then we help you guys make your preschool in your language, right? Perhaps a model like that could be looked at. But again, it all comes back to the resources. There are, certainly here at our Pūnana Leo, one teacher gets sick, we got to shut down school because no enough, right? And so that capacity development, we got to figure out the sequence of things to grow without stretching too far, yeah?
Kapualei Ula, any thoughts
Yeah.
on growing the program on the mainland?
Yeah, I know. I saw that question in the chat, and I thought about just how much it's already growing, and also what Ilihia said. And I think this had to do a lot with COVID. I noticed a lot of Native Hawaiian speakers were moving to the continent and moving off over there, and it's like they're raising their families there. And I know they want to learn the ʻōlelo, and I know that there's potential because we've been able to move it in so many different contexts, right? But I think I was a little worried, like what Ilihia was saying, we don't want to stretch too far, right? And when you're thinking about moving to a different area, like away from Hawaii, and then teaching the values in the ʻōlelo of Hawaii, it's really important, I think, to understand the new area that you're going into. Like Ilihia is saying, maybe getting together with like the native indigenous people of those lands and kind of talking stories and kind of figuring out how they do things. I definitely think there's potential. And because of a lot of people moving up there, there will be a lot more bodies and capacities for groups to get together like how we did here. It's more so the routine and the structure that was just created here in Hawaii. I'm not sure how that would look like transitioning to a different just a different area. I see potential. I don't know what that looks like. It's positive, but I definitely see it's there. I don't know what that looks like necessarily. But I also think that our Papahana kind of started like that. So much potential with all these goals. We didn't know where it was going to go, and here we are. So yes, Lea Aloha, I definitely think there's potential. I'm just not sure how we're going to get there. But lucky we got all these smart people on these panels, huh, guys? That's kind of mine.
Yes, Lealoha Kaula does look ready to make some ground movement there in Ole Kona when it comes to welcoming the Pūnana Leo there. So we'll keep that in mind. But we're coming to the close of our session here. Again, a big mahalo to everyone who's joined us. I just want to give maybe a minute to everyone if there are any closing mana'o to share before we leave our panelists. No?
Well, mana'o, mahalo for this opportunity. Mahalo, Mrs. Rollins, for organizing this, setting it up. But to have and to share this, and this on this last note of the main, starting up perhaps with our ohana who are now living elsewhere, and luckily they're congregating. I think it tends to make our Hawaiian population over there come together a little bit more than we do here sometimes. So we can envy that, and that helps. So that's a major one. You need to have parent and ohana support, and then of course these other little details that are important, fluency, etc., and teacher, staff, and all of that. I can anticipate, oh boy, a little bit coins on traveling and coordinating. They have a bigger space over there to go, drive your vehicle, or unless we're going to fly or whatever, all of those kinds of things. But with the enthusiasm and support from a group, and we have our ohana there in groups, strong groups, I think it's going to happen sooner or later, right? Sooner, hopefully, than later. But mahalo for this opportunity to participate. Language brings us into all mediums of our life. So, I mean, it's so hard, to talk about everything, and you guys representing all of that. Oh, we all represent all of that. But, the bottom line is getting strong in who we are through our language and our own identity. So, and that is going to evolve, right? We're not all going to be the same. And it's just great to be a participant, a group of people who are Hawaiian living in today's world and for tomorrow. So mahalo for this kind of a panel to bring that to the audience. Mahalo.
We may have to end there, but I will. That's a great note to run off of. I just wanted to remind everyone this is the day one of the United Nations Permanent Forum on Indigenous Issues. We are spending the next decade dedicated the International Decade of Indigenous Languages to draw attention to the loss of our ʻōlelo ʻōiwi and the urgent need to preserve and promote them. We hope we did some of that here today. If you'd like any more information on the Hawaiian language revitalization movement or ʻAha Pūnana Leo, please visit ʻahapunanaleo.org. We'll throw that into the chat, please. And mahalo ya ʻoukou no ka noho ana me a'u for this awesome discussion, and best of luck in continuing to use ʻōlelo Hawaiʻi on a daily basis.
Mahalo nui.
Mahalo.
Mahalo nui.
Aloha.
Ahui o kākou.
Hui hou.